Hi, I'm Dr. Lindsay Glass Campbell. I'm with the Cultivated Oyster Mariculture program and permitting here at TPWD. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so tonight we're here for a public hearing for proposed grow out site that will be designated as G-0021 in Matagorda Bay. The purpose of this public hearing is to provide information on cultivated oyster mariculture, this particular grow out site within Matagorda Bay, and also answer any questions on the proposed site and give instructions on how to submit public comment. A little bit of background on cultivated oyster mariculture, or COM as we abbreviate it, and I'll use throughout the presentation. TPWD, we permit the activity of oyster mariculture at grow out sites and also called farm sites, and then nursery hatchery locations where oysters are spawned and grown in early life. For our grow out site, this is all off bottom mariculture, so gear anchored to the bottom but floating in the water column. Applicants nominate their own sites and they must conduct a natural resource survey to make sure that that particular site is not, there are not any types of habitat that would be impacted or that we have buffers around, such as oyster reef, seagrass beds, and other sensitive habitat. Each permit has a 10-year term, and only the eastern oyster from Texas broodstock are allowed. A little bit about to show you gear. These are three of the main types of gear you would probably see in a location. We have floating bags, and so even though these are called bags, it's a stiff mesh, kind of more of an envelope, but they'll have floats on the bottom and they're attached to lines. If the oyster's up, that's the desiccation or drying position, and then when the bags are down and you see the floats on top, that's the oyster feeding position. Kind of moving a little bit larger than those are our floating cages, and our floating cages contain bags. They have different chambers for those. They're just a little bit larger, so you have a heavier metal cage around those bags, and larger floats. And again, you can have that feeding position and drying position. Lastly, there's an adjustable long line system. So these are posts and they have rope wire lines strung between the posts, and they'll have 3 levels of line, and or they'll have clips and they move the line up and down. So the drying position, oysters are out of the water, feeding position at that top layer of the water column, and then kind of a storm surge protection position that has the line can be situated closer to the bottom. So an annual fee for this permit is paid, and it's based on the size of the location. You must also, or applicants must also get authorizations from other agencies such as the Texas General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, U.S. Army Corps of Engineer that coordinates the federal review of permits, and marking determination and permits from the U.S. Coast Guard for these locations. There is an active use criteria whereby oysters, you must stock oysters to your site a certain minimum amount per year, just to ensure that if someone has this there using the site, it's not just taking it out, holding it to keep other people out of a particular area. Harvest is allowed year-round. However, you must comply with all regulations set by the Texas Department of State Health Services, such as closures and time to temperature matrix. A little bit about how we partner with the Texas Department of State Health Services to ensure oyster safety for consumers. That permit classifies they sample bodies of water and then classify them for oyster harvest. This classification only applies to an oyster harvest in that area. So if you may see an area that says restricted, that's for that classification. It's not particularly about oyster harvest in that area. It does not impact any other type of recreation or use of the area other than that oyster harvest. TPWD is not involved in these classifications. Again, this is done separately by the Department of Health. And you can find more information about that on the Texas Department of State Health Services website, and in particular, their Seafood and Aquatic Life group. So, onto the specifics of this proposed site. It is a grow out site where oysters are grown to harvestable for consumption. It's located in Matagorda Bay near Keller Bay, which is Shellfish Harvest Area TX18, designated approved waters, and 8 acres. Here in our vicinity, it's in Calhoun County, and then zoom out and we'll see kind of the star represents the location in the wider area, and then closer in. And here's a bit more zoom in of the proposed route map to the site. So leaving from Olivia Boat Ramp and traveling through Keller Bay to the site that's just right outside the mouth of Keller Bay. They propose using floating cages from Ketchum Supply. Each line that holds cages will be anchored with our helix anchors, 66 inches. They'll use polypropylene anchor lines and lateral lines to secure their gear, with PVC buoys on either ends of those lines to mark the lines where the lines end, and with 5 to 7 columns across the 8 acres with 10 to 12 rows per column. And we'll look at a site overhead site layout slide next to kind of visualize that more. Navigational markers, again, are dependent on what the Coast Guard determines, but proposing that corner pylons marking with lights and proper signage. For bird deterrence, if needed, they will use the plastic bird deterrent spikes, and there's kind of an example of what those look in down here, that picture that would go on the floats to stick out to keep birds from landing on those cages. Here's our overhead site layout, and you see the different columns, and then within the columns the lines indicate, and then those circles indicate where both the anchors and those buoys will be. The diamonds indicate where they're proposing to put those pilings to help mark the sites for navigation. And here's a cross-sectional view to give a little better idea of how the spacing will be. So within a column, there will be the anchor and main line, and then they have these lateral lines that each cage is attached to the main line there at 2 anchor points, with cages spaced apart about 16 feet total in between, and then between each row 20 feet, so allows boat navigation and for them to work the gear. On-site operations are by boat due to the depth of the water here, with an access multiple times a week as weather permits. The floating cage system they will also use desiccation practice, and what that does when it's floated or flipped to the desiccation, Oysters close up and can survive that, but it helps reduce biofouling, so dry up any algae growing there, and then cause other organisms such as little crabs that are feasting on the oysters to drop out during that period. Once that happens, they'll be resubmerged and they will abide by the resubmergence guidelines prior to harvest that are set by the health department and the overseeing national regulations on oyster safety. Oysters will be tumbled and sorted as needed within the site on the water on the vessel. All gear will have their identification tags with contact information. Their hurricane plan includes 72 hours prior to predicted landfall. They'll be monitoring the winds, the level, the cone of impact, and seeing where that cone of impact is. If the site falls within the cone of impact 48 hours prior to landfall and it's a category 2 or greater, they will sink the cages. Post-storm, they will refloat, check all cages, lines, oysters and for any damage, repairs, and assess the damage. As mentioned earlier, there was a natural resource survey done for the site. They did side scan to supplement their sediment samples. So on the screen here, you see the side scan overview. You don't see a lot, and that's kind of what we want to see in side scans for this area. We don't want to see oyster reef, seagrass, or anything. And then the site is in the green with the dots showing where their grab samples, sediment samples were taken. And then the blue is the 200-foot buffer from the site, and the pink is the 500-foot buffer. So for the site, the sonar scans, side scan was work conducted on June the 21st of 2024, and sediment samples were collected the 2 days after that. The depth ranged between 7 and 10 feet. Sample composition were sand, silt, and mud, and there were found no evidence of oyster habitat or seagrass. And here's some examples, 2 examples of the pictures of those sediment samples. Each sediment sample, the applicants must take a picture of to document and provide that to us for review. So you see just mud, sand going off. They used this contraption, the contraption that you see above the pictures, that's called a ponar grab. That's what they use to sample the sediment. It's one of many types of ways you can collect the sediment layer there for sampling. So the next steps for this is that public comment is open and until September the 11th, 2024, which is the deadline for the public comment. You submit public comment to our email, oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. Parks and Wildlife will consider any relevant public comment that we receive. After any considerations or alterations that may or may not need to take place due to public comment, the conditional permit is issued. At this time, they cannot begin mariculture activity. This is just what they take when they go to the other agencies seeking those other authorizations to show that yes, it's something TPWD has approved. And once they gather those other authorizations, they'll bring them back to us, we verify that they did in fact get those authorizations, and at that point in time their full or final permit is issued and mariculture activity can begin. So again, public comment period is open until that September 11th date. Please submit to the oyster.mariculture address. I will leave this up for now, the slide up for you to view. But at this time, if there are any questions, go ahead and answer that. We'll just give it a few minutes in case there are questions. You just type it in the question and answer, the chat feature, and we'll just give y'all a minute or so to apply any questions you have. Okay, it does not look like we have any questions at this time, but again, after, if you are watching this recording after the live broadcast later, if you have questions, you can also submit questions to the Oyster Mariculture email address and submit your public comment there. I will hand it over to Holly again so she can just go over the wrap up of the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And basically, Lindsay covered it. You'll be getting an email tomorrow from Zoom with that email address, the link again to our Oyster Mariculture site, as well as a link to that YouTube channel where we'll get a recording of this posted. So thank you everyone so much for being here this evening. Thank you, Lindsay, for a presentation. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.